Oh, it's quadruple strike, yeah. But I don't think there's anything with quadruple attack. But
no, there isn't.
I'm pretty sure it's in the rules.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Should be one soon.
Soon, yeah. At some point. There you go. There's a brand new skill. We'll give that to Bandai for free. Hello and welcome to Super ComBros, the Dragon Ball Super card game podcast, where we argue about things we're poorly informed about and the power levels don't matter. I'm Barry, and joining me today is Vince. Say hi, Vince.
Hi, everyone.
And for a bit of variety, we've got Matt. Say hi, Matt.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Hello, good evening, and welcome. Right, today we're going to be taking a bit of a look at Unison Warrior 2's new mechanisms, the Overlord Servant. Keywords, but before that we want to discuss some of the other keywords that this game has, and particularly those that Bandai somewhat left by the wayside or underutilized. Now, personally, I didn't have much trouble coming up with things that seem underdeveloped. Matt, looking into the card pool, was there anything there that you struggled with, that you thought was overdeveloped?
Overdeveloped? I don't think so. I think, in my perspective, a lot of the time, every new set, they're like, oh, let's do this new thing, and then the next set is let's do this new thing, but it doesn't build on what they've built before, and I kind of find that quite irritating. Like, for example, we've had the Unison Warrior 2 stuff spoiled. They're talking about Baby again. Oh, good, Red Yellow Baby was a top tier deck. Or maybe they'll get some more support. No, Color Shift to Blue, we're doing something completely different.
Yeah, selling cards.
Yeah, selling cards, and I feel like they're just a bit scattered, and I'd quite like them to focus and dig down on some things a little bit more.
Fine.
I have to admit, I wonder if it's not one of the things. So I'm quite split as well when it comes to this. I see it very scattered, and I'm like, that's a bit sad. I like to have a bit more consistency and some themes developed over a longer period of time. But at the same time, I'm like, isn't that what actually keeps the game balanced? Because they can create for each and every set, or each and every set they want, a very dedicated mechanic that they know is going to live only on that set, and that kind of frees or makes the design space safer later when they want to create new mechanics or new cards. They have to worry less about how that will interact with other cards. And although that's a bit frustrating not to see these keywords and other mechanics we can think of that might be a bit underdeveloped, it might be what keeps the game fairly balanced and interesting when you move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense enough for me. But there's definitely things where it's weird they've not tried to fill in the gaps, right? I mean, there's some things I can absolutely understand why they've abandoned it. Some things, some keywords that are new, like what Matt was saying there, it's come out in a new set. They've not had an opportunity to revisit it yet. But certainly some other things, 1 or 2 cards per set, whether you rotate the color, could take or possibly bring out a low powered card and just provide some more options for old keywords to maybe share the limelight. So when you've got your old deck, you can still keep up with the meta. Just a couple of meta relevant cards where maybe you don't stay tier 1 with it, but you can at least be competitive. Would be interesting to me, but they do seem obsessed by adding new mechanisms every set. And to be fair, Unison, a whole new card type, a whole new mechanic to the game, whole new play style to the game, I think is really good. But looking at Servant Overlord without getting into it too much now, I think some of that looks like a step backwards. That's only going to be relevant probably for Unison Warrior, and then they'll immediately ditch it and move on to something else.
So if I understood correctly, we'll come to Servant and Overlord a bit later in the podcast. I'll save some of my points about that for then. Mm-hmm. Then again, right there with you, I don't know if they ditch the old mechanics and old keywords just because they are really focused on getting new ones in the game, or if they're actually conscious of the fact that if you want to build on old mechanics, you might end up creating a monster that's going to be very, very hard to stop with just design.
We discussed last week that they're quick to step in with ban lists, restricted lists, make changes. errata. That if they didn't manage to get to a point where, okay, well, actually, this card we should never have made. Losing one card from a set doesn't really devalue necessarily the whole set, doesn't stop people wanting to buy that. So if you did bring out some cards for these old keywords, then it would, even if you did manage to overtune it for an old deck, removing that one card that made it broken, you could still come back in the next set with something else that isn't quite as strong. But
fair play.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there. I think the other problem for the game is, the revisiting keywords is a problem for a game with no rotation, and no way to purchase those old cards. So if you were to bring out if you were to bring out a couple of cards just for, say, Bond, which we'll talk about, it might be that you've not got any other Bond cards, and there's no way of getting those Bond cards, right? Because there's no boxes of old cards sitting in warehouses because of the way, again, I kind of discussed how Japanese companies print versus Western companies. But again, that's probably out with the scope of this discussion, where we're just going to talk about the keywords themselves and what we'd like to see done with them, or what would have been nice to have done with them, or whether they're fine as they are. Yeah, makes sense?
It does.
Cool. Well, I think we're just going to run through sort of the keywords in order, group them as best makes sense to me. But one of the first sort of keywords in the game, and something that's been around since the start, are the activate battle and activate main skills. So Matt, do you have any thoughts on those two areas of the game, or those two keywords?
No, and I think with the focus on sort of undeveloped areas, I mean, they use this all the time. They do a good job of using it, in most of the sets. I think it's the meat of the game, like you mentioned sort of before we discussed it. There's plenty of these effects, and I don't think we should really go into them because we'd be here for hours and hours just on this one thing. So maybe I have to save it for another time.
Agreed. Vince, you got anything you think's not done well with activate battle or activate main?
Not really. I'm kind of on the same wavelength as Matt here. It's the meat of the game. It's just some very basic elements of it, and if you start criticizing them, you'll probably start criticizing the game in a much deeper level. The only thing I'd say is maybe I find myself looking more and more often for activate battles on my cards, as I find this I find it very strong, just being able to activate your card on your opponent's turn during their battles. But
Yep. Agree with both. Like, I've nothing extra to say there. That is fine. It will continue to be in every set going forward. And it's been in every set so far. So that's fine. But another sort of core part of the game experience is probably the dual attack, triple attack, quadruple attacks. And off the back of that, I guess, the double strikes, triple strikes, quadruple strikes, and perhaps most interestingly, victory strike. I mean, Vince, are you thinking any of those are underplayed, or do you think that the amount of cards that come in with those abilities are about right?
I do think whether it's about right or not today, I guess, is kind of relevant, probably. Like, there's so many of them in the game, and it's always very impactful on the card to see these appearing. Most of the time it's impactful when you have that on a card. So, like, if they were to print less of them, I still think we would see many of them in play. And I find them really cool. Like, they are the two sides of a coin. One where you do one attack with a massive threat to it, or one where you do a number of smaller attacks with a smaller threat. And the way to play around this, the way you'll play your card advantage around this is different. Yeah, I like it a lot. That's one of the things I really like about the game, and one of the things that really orientates how a deck can be played as well. It's just my feeling today, but you'll find that decks will orientate themselves more towards the multiple attacks or the very big strikes. And yeah, I tend to go more for the very big strikes. That's my own affinity. Just try to slow down the game and have that massive dragon punch at the end. Yeah, I do like it as it is. I don't know what, Matt, you think of it.
Yeah, I like it. I quite like that we've got Furthering Destruction, Champer, and the Kai that give access double strike to any card. That always gives a nice bit of flair near the end of the game, where you think you can survive one bit of damage and boom, they combo into a double strike. Adds a little bit of hidden information, bit of excitement through that. I'd kind of maybe like something that gave dual attack to cards in a sort of similar vein. You think they've swung out, but actually they stand up and can do one more swing. We've got the TN in Draft Box 5 that does it with a 10k skill list. It's quite nice. Obviously, you'd have to be pretty specific like that, otherwise you end up standing up your big triple strike guys or quadruple strike guys, such as the Pan from set 8. But yeah, a little bit more on the emphasis of standing things would be kind of nice to complement the champion. You could kind of go in one or two directions there. And then sort of, I think, to throw in with this lot of stuff, critical is probably within the same vein. And I quite like having the one drops that you can either choose to have a critical one or a double strike one. And with the rise of the Unison Warriors, that we've had a switch to using the double strike ones, whereas before a lot of people were just running the critical ones and not running the double strike ones at all. But I think before that was only just the Cabba from set 1. And yeah, it's kind of nice to sometimes have that trade-off, like, do you want to go critical, deny resources, or do you want to go double strike and just throw in damage?
Yeah. It gives a nice flavor to the decks, whether you go for one or for the other. Like, I mean, of course, when you become very competitive, it makes a big difference. But in the bigger scheme of things, it's not a big difference to your deck. But it still says which side of the battle you go, basically.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, dual attack versus double strike, two very different things. There's some ways that deal with multiple attacks, some sort of negates that deal with significant damage, or you can take off a keyword. The only thing in there that's particularly underused, and probably deliberately so, is Victory Strike, right? So, I mean, Victory Strike, I like that it exists. I think it enables a couple of deck types that otherwise couldn't exist, but it just sucks when it happens to you, right? So I don't know if it'd be a good idea to have Victory Strike on smaller cards, those at 15k, 20k, things you could combo out of quite easily. Forcing your opponent to deal with a small hit, say a 15k body came in, you might want to take it, but if you take it, you lose. You can force a card in a combo. Or if you've got the card advantage, you could push through, but it could be too powerful on small cards, right? Particularly if there was no other drawbacks to playing them.
Yeah, you'd have to have a pretty big drawback to have a Victory Strike on anything that's not your finisher. Because like you said, I think I really quite like having Victory Strike in the game. It allows you to play a control deck that still ends the game on turn 5 rather than just trying to mill your opponent out by card advantage alone.
Yeah.
So you don't just end up in a boring game of 20 turns. That's where I think it probably shines. And I also like the flavor that, the only Victory Strikes we have are the Ultra Instinct Gokus, and then on the other side, that Quadruple Strike is Jiren's thing. And so that you end up with like Jiren being Quad Strike, which is basically Victory Strike in pretty much nearly every situation, apart from very few. But then Goku does one slightly better and always kills. And I kind of like that.
Yeah,
it's very true. I do like it for that flavor side that you mentioned. Like when I heard of Victory Strike for the very first time when I started playing the game, I was like, "What? What do you mean one hit win? What do you mean?" And then when I understood a bit more the context, like it exists at the time, it existed only on one card, and that one card was like the summon of Goku's peak. And it was a card that was nearly inaccessible and that you would barely ever see on the table. I was like, okay, that's cool. Like that's the type of thing that deserves something really exceptional on it. And I was very happy. I was fine with it, and I found it quite fun. I even saw the card a few times. I'm like, okay, that's really cool. Big boss monster. And on top of it, it's not just on one card that's very strong. It's on a card that you can't counter the attack off as well. So it's just like that card really shines for this. And I have to admit, when they printed the keyword on the Secret Breath of Set 9, the Invoker Vegeta Goku that I don't remember the name of right now, when they printed it on it, I was like, a bit disappointed. I liked the idea of having Victory Strike as a defining unicity, defining key identity in a way of the game and of that card. And if they start to print it on more and more cards, I'm like, is it really a good idea? I don't know. Of course, only time will tell. But yeah.
I'm fine because I have Victory Strike, the apex of power. But having it on an £800 card, and only on an £800 card that will go up, is probably not great. But yeah, that's a separate issue, right? The fact that the card's expensive to physically expensive.
Absolutely, but I also have to admit the fact that it's very expensive card, therefore nearly inaccessible, for me makes Victory Strike good. If it was on any card, it's not exactly the right way to say it, but on a card that could easily see play, it feels like the variance it brings to the game would be really annoying to me. If it's just that one card and there's a lot of lore behind it and it's kind of the folklore of the game as well, then I'm really fine with it and I embrace it. If it sees more and more play and suddenly is, you've drawn your Victory Strike, okay, you win. That's not the type of things I would enjoy.
Yeah. Fine, yeah, the counter, uncounterable was a problem as well. But speaking of which, so the other sort of core part of the game is very prevalent to my mind are the counters. So it's counter attack, counter battle card attack, counter plays, and even counter counters. Do we think there's enough of them in the game? Do we think that they are underused, overused? Do we think they're necessary?
Yeah,
go ahead,
they're going to be necessary. I don't think you can have a sort of a back and forth interactive game of Dragon Ball without this being a core mechanic. Otherwise, without when everything just comes into the battlefield and it can attack straight away, it's just going to be pretty one-sided unless, on your opponent's turn you have this chance to interrupt them. They've used a lot of them. We're always getting new counterattacks. I think they're doing a good job of diversifying the counterattacks more recently. I think before a lot of them kind of did the same thing and not particularly interestingly. Whereas I think whilst we've got now Dormant Potential Unleashed, which is obviously a very strong card, it doesn't actually negate the attack, but it does, warp the rest of the turn. So it's kind of like a soft negate the first time, but then a harder negate later. So that sort of variance from just a straight up stop the attack, it's kind of nice to see. We've got the spoiler for the new one in the next set, which is also similarly, obviously, kind of warps the rest of the turn by stopping you swinging with 20k or more battle cards or 20k or more unison cards. So I think they're doing a good job to keep these fresh recently, and they're always going to continue to design these cards. And they're similar with the counter plays. We've obviously got the unison linked ones in the last set, but in set sort of 7, 8, and 9, I think the counter plays got really, really strong, and now we're seeing maybe less strong versions, though the unison ones are very good, but you can only use them once in the turn, so the whole game is not dominated by counter plays, whereas I think it kind of was for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Vince, what do you think about counters?
Just the very core of what Matt said, I agree. They are an integral part of the game, as in if you want to have some interactions in Dragon Ball, it's either combos or counters, so very happy to see them in the game. So Matt did mention, it's true, they are being diversified, and I like that they have different effects. One of the things I've seen come, and I wasn't very comfortable with it when it's been unveiled, is the free counter plays. And when I mean free, I know the Sparkling 5 before, where you just take a damage to enable the counter within a certain condition, was technically free before, and that was already something I found very powerful. So when I saw the ones coming that are free when you just have a unison card in play, or whether it has 2 markers or not on it, I was a bit, dubious, and I believe I still am today, even more in the lights of the counterplay Frieza and the counterplay Trunks being very strong. But then again, in the past few weeks and the number of tournaments that have happened, I don't think these two counters have brought their decks, their respective decks, to the top of the meter. So even if they're strong, they're probably balanced, or people have already found ways to work around. So I guess that's all right. But yeah, like anything that is free is something for me that needs to be looked at with a very specific lens, because like it can change the appreciation of the game very quickly. I've taken a very long road to say that I like counterplays, and I'm very curious to see what they will become.
Yeah, I mean, I think taking a life isn't free. Like, I would argue that wasn't a cost, but it can be sometimes beneficial. And the setup was very minimal for that. But it's even more minimal for these unison counterplays. The only good thing, or not the only good thing, but one good thing about the unison counterplays is that they're autos, so they have to hit the ground before you get the secondary effect.
Not for the trunks, you don't.
Not for the trunks. Yeah, the trunks is you just take it away from your hand and get the effect. There's no auto, or you have to have deflect to be immune to trunks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can obviously discuss trunks at a later thing. I think it's definitely worth having a good discussion about trunks and freezer and how to deal with them. But I think as part of this, we should probably keep going. For that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, well, just for my kind of rundown of the 4 different types of cards there. Like, counter battle card attack is now, since unisons are out, it's more situational, right? And countering a battle card to maybe play a 5k Pilaf and draw a card isn't particularly strong. I'd maybe like to see stronger upsides for counter battle card attacks.
It's certainly something that could be done more now that unisons are in the game and battle cards are a bit less pregnant. Like, you can give a bit more power to push the counter battle card attacks. Because as you said, like today, what are the counter battle card attacks that could see play apart from Mafuba? And then again, do you really want to play Mafuba today? Maybe for the 9-cost since Shenron, but other than that, is there many cards that would really warrant this? Not too sure.
Counterplays, we kind of touched on being, strong and have got stronger over the last sets, and it can often really set your opponent back. If we again just talk about the trunks and the freezers, there's not a huge downside for the person playing those counterplays. So I like the interactivity. I like that nothing's ever safe, but I think I'd like more counterplay extra cards than these battle cards that come into play, because at least extra cards have the downside of not being comboable. You will have to pay something for them, so maybe it's free counterplays that I don't like so much.
I see your point, like having the free counterplay on an extra card that won't bring you the value of being in play afterwards.
Yeah,
seem a bit more balanced. I'm no one to say whether these unison counterplays are balanced today or not, but I see your point.
Yeah, and I think they're probably introduced to try and slow down the pace a little bit, but I'm not sure it necessarily does that. I mean, it might just swing the balance in favour of the person making the counterplays for their next turn. But hard to say. Like I say, it's not been meta defining, but they keep coming out. Counters are probably the most interesting and certainly the most underused of all the segments there. You've got Swift Retaliation Cooler and Almighty Resistance. So both in yellow and in yellow-red there. There is Vegeta as well, but doesn't negate the counter that's happening. I think I prefer Swift Retaliation Cooler. It costs 3. Like, I feel like counters. I think we were in agreement that counters have to be in the game, both counter attacks and counter plays. But I feel like the cost at 3 and putting that card in your deck certainly worth it. Or not necessarily worth it. What's the word I'm after? It's a fair trade for countering somebody's counter. And I just like some comparably expensive counters that are maybe win or die type cards. If you counter somebody's counter, which is going to be the win, if that doesn't save your life, then it should be game over.
I mean, I have to say counters are definitely my favorite type of counters. I really love them even more because they're not played that much for very, very good reason. They're generally expensive, and getting use out of them is not necessarily that easy. You need to set up the right situations for the price you pay for that counter to really make a difference.
Yeah.
I do like them a lot. I always try to build at least one deck, or the right way of saying it is I always try to have one deck built that revolves around counter. And it's fun when you go strike with your heartfelt plea with that triple strike and just bring out almighty resistance in front of your opponent's counter and just swing the game from there. But I love them. I love that they're not too strong, because it does feel like if they were, because you play counter most of the time when you're the active player, which means that you've just stood all of your energy. So if they were easy to use, the advantage they would bring would really, really probably be too strong.
Yeah, and I think maybe if they were strong, then we'd end up with more counters that you'd have to play to stop your counters. And you end up in the sort of back and forth in that counter window. And maybe that's quite an interesting thing to happen in the game, right? You counter my thing, I counter that, you counter my counter, and we kind of get on top of that. But we've already kind of got the combo step to do that back and forward bit. I think counter plays already sort of feel into that. I play something, you counterplay that, I then, counterplay your counterplay. That's where we kind of get the back and forth. So as soon as we get more counters, if we end up in a counter chain, then I don't know. I'm not. Maybe the game doesn't really need that sort of like back and forward in that situation.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want them. I don't want any more. I don't think so, or at least not too many.
Talking about underutilized ones, counter extra card is not something that we've seen yet. Obviously, Invoker has been doing quite well at some of the Gen Con tournaments, and a lot of them are doing the catastrophic blow finisher that's unblockable damage. Do you think we should have a counter extra card in the game, or?
I mean, it'd be better. There is a tendency for Bandai to print silver bullets, right? I mean, when Shigesh, I don't know if you guys know or remember, but the 3-cost or the super combo Shigesh that let you play a Saiyan 3-drop. And then they printed the
some kind of Kai of Time, Supreme Kai of Time.
Yeah, Kai of Time that prevented that. And it was like, well, surely you shouldn't be having this level of silver bullet to deal with something that's a problem. So I think counter extra, yes, maybe, but not specifically because of Invoker. I don't know. It's tricky. You don't want every deck to have to run this or put it in their sideboard just to deal with Invoker, right? You're probably much better off fixing the uninteractivity of Invoker.
Yeah, and I guess if you end up with counter extras that just counter an extra card, which is probably maybe what they print first because it's the simplest thing. You end up countering extra negate, like counter attacks, and then you end up with a counter instead of a counter extra card, right? That's
unless you print a counter activate main or a counter battle.
Same thing. Yeah, those don't exist. Yeah,
it's probably going very, very deep or very.
I don't know. Like I'd much rather people were able to execute their game plan and play with their cards, right, than just have it completely shut down. Like anything you try and do, you just can't. Is very unsatisfying as a game.
Absolutely, and there's also the fact that not having these type of counters simplifies is not exactly the right word, but it makes the game more straightforward, more easily readable in a way, and more enjoyable. If you make it too complex just for the sake of complexity, then you just lose the point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Right. So let's move on to actual proper keywords then, shall we?
The red ones.
The red ones. Well, we glossed over. I mean, dual attack, critical.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So proper ones. So coming around with the multicolor set. So set 7, set 8. Some into set 9 and 10. Not a lot. In fact, is there a 9 set 10? Don't think so.
There isn't. Yeah.
No, there's what do you call it? Arrival, but there's not anything else, which we'll come on to in a minute. So you've got your dual color special abilities, right? So these were introduced with dual color cards. You've got Aegis, Alliance, Invoker, Offering, Revive, and Successor. So these only, they're quite new. They're only within the last sort of 2-3 sets. Not had a huge amount of time to be developed, so worth bearing that in mind. And while a couple of them are actually kind of fine standalone, a couple are pretty underwhelming as is. So, we'll just go through them in order, and I'll give you a definition, because some people are going to ask what the hell Aegis is, but we'll start there. But Aegis is discard a blue-yellow, so either a blue card and a yellow card, or a blue-yellow card, to stand 2 energy, and it's done at activate battle speed. So Matt, starting with you, what do you think of Aegis?
Well, I don't think I've really seen any cards with Aegis on it in any proper decks. Obviously, I've not been playing for ages and ages, but I've been reasonably active during this sort of time that Aegis has been around. It just doesn't really seem to do anything. And obviously, we've got the gods in the Draftbox 5 who are trying to reboot these keywords, which is nice to give them a little bit of support, but shame that it's only very sort of extreme rarities. And we've got Geen and Martine, which is the U12 Destroyer and Angel, and it lets you sort of draw the cards as well, so you can cycle your cards. But standing 2 energy out of a deck running blue I don't really see the point of it. Blue can already stand all its energy. It's got Senzu Beam, it's got Dimension Magic. Half the cards that blue play stand energy as part of their effects. That's blue's identity. And so adding a keyword that also stands energy doesn't really add anything new to the sort of colour pair. It just gives them more of the same thing, and then do they really need it? And I sort of don't think they really do.
Mm-hmm. Vince, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm sort of on the other side there, where I do like Aegis. That's how you pronounce it, right? Aegis.
Close enough, yeah. On the dual vowel, it's usually the second vowel that gets the hard sound. So Aegis.
Aegis. Let's do this. So I do like Aegis a lot mainly because of Geen and Martin, which is an amazing card. Of course, it's rare, so it's hard to get, but it's an amazing card. And it's true that it stands energy, something that blue does, but it allows you to do it. It gives more variety in the way you can do this, which means that you don't have to rely on the usual cards that are, as you said, Senzu Beam and Dimension Magic, even more in a deck that does not have a blue leader. So yeah, I do like Aegis a lot. I think it's a bit underestimated. There's a lot to do with it. There are a few nice interactions with it, like when there's a Vegeta, if I remember correctly, that says when one of your energy stands due to a skill during your opponent's turn or something like this, you draw a card. So there's a really, really strong draw engine to be had there. Of course, Geen and Martin does a very, very good amount of work for this type of decks, but it really got me in love with Aegis, and I really want to have more of this in my game.
Yeah, it's not played, right? And I think a big part of that's because there's 7 cards that have Aegis. And it didn't really kick off, and the built-in ability of standing energy, like Matt says, is from blue, so it moves a little bit of blue into yellow. Okay, fine, because you can stand any kind of colour. But most do something else as well, and it's still not played. On paper, looks good. And what you're saying with the Geen and Martin cards lets you draw 2 as well, which is phenomenal. Still not played. But it seems super strong on defense to me. And just thinking about it, you discard a blue-yellow card, and I'm right in saying that it can just be a single card, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
This isn't one of the ones.
Same as Arrival, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Discard 1. Let's say you're tapped out, your opponent swings, they think they've got it. You discard this, that would have cost you 1 for a 10k combo that you couldn't play anyway. You stand 2 energy, you draw 2 cards, and then you can combo out of something that your opponent thought they had you banged to rights. So it seems good on defense in particular, but it just doesn't get played. I don't know. Is it because blue-yellow isn't as good anymore? Now that U6 isn't...
No, I think blue-yellow is really strong, right? Go Tanks from Gen Cons, a lot of those were blue-yellow. I mean, specifically, I think they were splashing the blue-yellow Arrival Hit and Goku from set 10 and just Senzu Bean. And the thing is, if you're just going to play if you're playing Senzu Bean, do you need Aegis as well? Do you need to stand all of your energy? No, you just need to stand 2 energy. And whilst obviously Aegis, you can have no energy standing and then use it, the fact that it's already on a board means there's no surprise to it. Your opponent can see it come in. It's not like, oh, you stood 2 energy out of nowhere, or you can do something interesting. It's like, okay, when I attack you, you're going to use Aegis, you're going to stand 2 energy, then you can do something.
Yeah.
And
I mean, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's fine. Yeah, and I think, like I said, just blue already stands energy. Like, why make your defining colour pair between blue and yellow about something that one of those colours already does? Really, you should be making it about something that only blue and yellow does.
Yeah.
Like as the colour pair, like that you should like synergize together and go, right, this is the blue-yellow identity, but it's not. It's the blue identity.
I mean, I do get your point. Like you're just standing more energy, which you can already do with other cards that are staple of any deck that runs a bit of blue, Senzu Bean. But the fact that you can start from 0 is good. That being said, as you say, like you stand 2 energies, and it does feel today with the direction the game is going to. Having impactful play takes less energy. Therefore, you don't necessarily need to stand 2. Standing only 1 can be enough. If I was to today try to build an Aegis deck, which I will probably do after we finish recording this podcast, I probably would try to have in this deck cards that cost a decent amount of energy, like some of the most impactful cards that you can play during your opponent's turn that could cost up 3-4 energies if we think always that that blue 4-card Goku that does so many counters. I believe I would try to find something around this. I don't know if today this is good enough because power level has increased a bit and it's a bit less expensive to do something that is as impactful as before. But yeah, I do like Aegis. I do think it deserves a bit more attention, and I also think that next card that is released with Aegis on it is gonna spin a deck right out of it, and it's going to become an archetype that's going to be played around everywhere.
We'll see.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Bin it. Get a new one, Bandai. That's my opinion.
Give us something else. I'm just having a look at the Aegis cards, and the ones with barrier. No, I suppose Violent. The new Bojack out of the EX lets you draw a card when you activate it as well, so you get 3 cards out of it.
Well, it's a really good one, isn't it? Because like you pay 1 yellow to get him out, then you discard a card that you're gonna get back to just stand 2 energies. It's also pretty good.
Yeah, fine. I mean, underwhelming, but something that
exciting.
It's not. It's really uninspiring.
Listen, yeah, Vince, I've got another deck that you're going to want to make after we discuss this. So maybe we'll see about Aegis, but we'll come back to that. All right, next one in the dual color chart, so to speak, Alliance. So here you would exhaust a red or green battle card in play to add its battle power to a card with Alliance, and that's again activate battle speed, I think. So Vince, what have you ever used Alliance? Have you ever played against it?
I have actually used it. I've built 2 or 3 decks that were really centered around Alliance, whether it was using the Sun Gohan leader or not. I won't say that they were very, very successful, but they were very good fun to play with. And I do like Alliance as well a lot. I think it's less strong than Aegis, so I'm curious to see what Matt will say about it. But I do like it a lot. Not so much for the boost in strength or in power that it brings, than for all the effects that will come with it when you use Alliance. So yeah, that's I like it a lot. I love the deck that's coming out. I love playing Son Gohan and Son Goten familial bonds. There's a lot of very cool things to do with it. It's definitely a how do you call it? A long game play. Like it's not something that you'll be able to take advantage of in turn 2, even maybe turn 3. But if you manage to get there, like it makes room for some very, very impactful plays, and I like that a lot.
Matt, why is Vince wrong?
No, well, I agree with Vince. You know.
just checking.
Because I'll tell you what the difference here between Alliance and Aegis is that Aegis does one thing, right? Stands to NG, done, end of. Alliance is all about like what do you get for kneeling other battle cards, and that's you're making a trade here, right? So when you swing one battle card, you have to kneel out your other battle cards to make that one card better. And when the game is centered around counterattacks that negate one attack, that thing where you make that one attack more impactful has to be good enough rather than just swinging multiple times, which you would be able to do if you had the cards out to trigger Alliance anyway. And I think at the first they didn't quite balance it right. Whilst I wasn't really playing as much in set 7, I don't think the Alliance cards were sort of big part of that meta. But now recently we've got the Angels from Jackbox Farm of Liqueur and Corin, and that's seen quite a lot of play. Probably the most play out of all the gods with the keywords. And then we've got the new Gohan in the Store Champ promo?
Yeah, it's SF3 Gohan Masters Surpassed.
That's the one. Yeah, and he is quite interesting, right? Because he's sort of, you swing with him in Alliance, boosts his damage, but then his effect happens the turn after. And I think they're making the things that happen because you're triggering Alliance a lot more, they're making them quite interesting.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think Alliance is one of the ones that's better, and I think it's better because it already has some support, right? It's not just the cards with Alliance on it that, or with the Alliance keyword that do something. Others will boost that when they're exhausted to activate Alliance, and there was already some of them. So again, you've only got about 7 cards with the Alliance keyword on it, but the support in the form of cards which are put in rest by the skill to do something else already makes it better than Aegis, which doesn't have any kind of support. And then sorry for cutting you on this, but one of the key differences is for Alliance, there is a leader that really mentions Alliance and revolves around this. It's not the case for Aegis. For Aegis, there's no leader with Aegis or referring to Aegis. So give a leader to Aegis and maybe let things happen.
I get your point there, Vince, but I mean, I think Liquor and Corin is mostly played out of Surge, Broly, and that doesn't trigger off Alliance, right? You know, the Gohan has seen some support recently, but I think that's because of Bardock rather than Alliance, the sort of second ability it has on the Awaken side, triggering off Alliance.
Yeah, and to be fair, like to get the most out of Alliance, it is quite expensive. Like getting that SS Gogeta down does damage when it's nailed. It's expensive. Keeping your Liquor and Corin. What is Corin?
What do you mean? What is Corin?
Stand by. Corin is a gin. Okay. Because all the angels are named after alcohol, right?
Yeah.
So Jean and Martin, Corin, Liquor, and Corin. Corin's a gin. Yeah, a little bit. But I'll be honest, like being on the bad side of Alliance can sometimes feel a little unfair when it goes off. Do you think that if it continued to get support, it would become too strong? Do you think it has a lot of room left for different design?
I don't think it's ever going to be too strong. Like I believe it's going to find meters in which it has more space to perform than others. But I don't think it's going to become obnoxious and something a bit like what we've seen with the Black Q3 cards. I don't think it's ever going to become that.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to keep your Alliance card on the field and also your other cards to trigger the Alliance. And those cards are going to be probably a bit shit, right? They're not going to have protection. Otherwise, you'd just be using them to attack with.
Yeah, and similarly, you can counter the Alliance card, right?
Yeah.
So.
And something else, just for context again, Alliance is triggered as an auto keyword, just like dual attack.
Yeah, so you can throw it in even after it's countered. Fine. Okay, on to the next one. So probably the most popular of the keywords that came out at this time is Invoker. So Invoker lets you rest a blue or exhaust a blue-red energy to pay for a blue-red extra card instead of its normal cost. So even if it normally cost 4 or 5 or more, you could just kneel 1 blue-red energy to pay for it instead. So obviously Invoker's the strongest archetype to come out of this. But theoretically, it does only support 1 deck type at the moment. I think.
I mean,
yeah.
Not only theoretically, it's practically it's 1 deck, and it's a very strong deck today. I find this one interesting because it's really the one keyword that appeals the least to me. Although I've built a deck for it for the team battle we had with TCG Collectibles. But yeah, it's the one that appeals the less to me, mainly because it cheats. It basically cheats costs, and it does it very blatantly, and it just appeals less to me. I understand how when you kneel 1 energy to counter an attack and draw 2 cards out of it, or to deal 1 damage to your opponent, or what else have you, reset the board. It is very strong, but I'm not sure it calls for balance. Like, this is exactly the type of things that can restrict game design moving forward.
Yeah, that's my biggest downside to Invoker, that you have to be careful of providing too much support for it, and it completely restricts what blue-red extra cards can be printed, because they always have the possibility of being played for 1. So that's kind of my biggest problem with Invoker. But I think in terms of design space, Matt, you were thinking there's some other problems with it as well.
Yeah, I think just in my general view, Invoker, I really like Invoker. I think it really defines the blue-red playstyles, right? Blue-red, you're going to play Invoker, you're going to play extra cards over battle cards, you're going to be probably more controlling, play a longer game. It really promotes a quite distinct playstyle, and I think that's why Vince doesn't think it's particularly interesting, but I actually think it's probably one of the most interesting, because it does promote kind of a style that's kind of different from maybe the mainstream Dragon Ball kind of decks. And whilst you say it limits the design space of all sort of blue-red like extras going forward, I think it actually just enforces maybe the theme, is not necessarily like minimizes design space, but makes the blue-red design space more interesting in that it does a very specific thing. You can print a load of really high-cost blue-red cards that aren't going to get played in anything else apart from Invoker, which allows you to develop a playstyle over the course of the game that is never really going to get broken, because it's never going to get seen outside of this 1 deck.
Yeah, okay. So you're saying basically the designers, by making the cost of a card, say 3 or above, are basically designing that card for the Invoker deck, blue-red extra card. And therefore, it's a bit like saying, a bit like in the conversation we've had in the previous podcast, where you have very, very specific mechanics to 1 set or something like this, and you can just design them for the set, knowing that it won't bleed in the others and it won't cause problems. Yeah, it's true. I find it interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
And, I think it has the widest design space, right? Because whilst Invoker itself doesn't do anything, like, it's like, obviously, all your blue-red extra cards cost 1. That's the only thing Invoker does. But how many different blue-red extra cards can you print? As many as you want. And they can all do like really weird different things. And
yeah, but as long as it's balanced around paying 1.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? The question, I mean, for all the cards that will be like 3, 4 and above, like, you can see how they go only in the Invoker deck. But for all the other ones, like the basic blue-red extra cards that are all 2 costs, how do you balance them between need to be good enough to be played in other decks, but not good enough that when you play them in Invoker, it just goes out of control?
Yeah, and I think the limit on Invoker is always that you're going to have the battle card in play that has Invoker on it, unless obviously they put it on a Unison or a leader.
Oh god.
Or a leader. So you can always balance it around how strong you make this removal, how strong you make the counter plays. And I think at the moment Invoker's got 3 cost Vegeta, right? They made this card and they're like, okay, let's make 1 card that makes Invoker playable. Let's make it not get counter played, and then stick on the board for as long as possible, because it's got Deflect and Barrier. And I think they made it strong enough. I think they obviously made it quite bland, so that there's only really one way of kind of playing Invoker at the moment. It's like you play that Vegeta or you don't bother.
Yeah.
And I do think we'll come on to maybe Deflect and Barrier a little bit later, but there are enough ways to remove a 3-drop Barrier card that you could at least tech against it in your sideboard.
Yeah, I mean Demigra from Demigra Unison gets rid of it. Yeah, the green one.
Yeah, like there's plenty of things to get rid of it. So it's never going to be bust, but it does feel it's obviously strong just now. If it gets too much support, does it become too strong?
Yeah, but I think what's strong about it at the moment isn't the counter plays or the counter attacks. It's just the catastrophic blow is unblockable and uninteractive, and that's what always going to feel bad, I think. Until they do print the counter extra card, and then Invoker becomes unplayable, and then they ban it, and then you end up with it again
later on.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, now I guess that's it for our conversation. We could continue talking about the Invoker deck and catastrophic blow specifically, but that would be probably just drifting a bit too far away from Invoker, the keyword in itself.
Into the archetype. Fine. So then we're on to Offering. So this is yellow-red, always yellow-red. When you play a card with Offering, your opponent either puts a life from their, or puts one card from their life into their drop, so effectively critting a life, or lets you draw 2 cards. I mean, I think there's some balance there in letting the opponent choose. I do think it does something a little different. If we're thinking about where it sits on the color chart, and realistically, it works fine as a standalone. To my mind, like it doesn't need support. Any card with Offering can be looked at in isolation, but that's also a little bit of its weakness, right? I mean, it doesn't. You don't have to build around it. If there's just a good Offering card, you can put it in. Again, the Angels obviously focused on this again, and the 2-drop Angels pretty good. But you can easily slip this into a future set without any other concerns, as long as it's balanced for what it gets you. I don't know if people like Offering or don't like Offering.
I mean,
I'm very. Go ahead.
No, you go, Vince. You've always let me. You can go for this time.
I'm very neutral about Offering, exactly for the reasons you said. Like, it's fairly straightforward. It doesn't really interact with anything else, at least at the moment. I do think it's strong enough when placed on the right card. When placed on the right card, it's probably a bit underplayed. And now that you mention it, I'm like, should we build an Offering deck and put as many Offering cards as possible in it just to see what happens? But
I did that with I think we played, and that was the baby fetch Offering, and the Angels, and the Heartfelt Pleas, and out of the baby. It wasn't
that great. Yeah.
It wasn't very good, yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. But I have to admit, every time I see the Heartfelt Plea come in, and you see the triple strike arriving, and you have the Offering on top of it, like the second Kiss Cool effect. Like, wow, okay, like that's impactful. But probably is impactful because Heartfelt Plea is in itself, and would be probably without Offering as well. So yeah, I'm fairly neutral. Whether there's more or less, like, I don't really mind. It's just gonna be a bit like critical, like double strike, like dual attack, just an element to take into consideration when evaluating the power level of a card.
Yeah, it's just like a nice little bonus. This card has it. Oh, that's like a net positive. It does this thing. It does something that I think is reasonably interesting when you play the game, but when you're building a deck, it doesn't do anything interesting at all. And it's not particularly exciting. Like, oh, this card's got Offering. It's not like, even Aegis is like, oh, what could I do with that 2 energy? And Alliance, oh, what does this thing do? Invoker is like, oh, I can play all these really funky extra cards. And Offering is like, oh, I can play this card, and then it does something that's kind of good.
Yeah, I mean, there's some consistency there. Either you get to draw, which is good, card advantage, or your opponent crits a life, which is, again, both card advantage and getting you closer to your win condition.
Yeah, it's just good. But I think in the sort of theme of this podcast about developing it, they can't really do anything else with the Offering. They can put Offering on more cards, and maybe at some point you can have a whole deck that has enough Offering on it and is consistent enough that it has a huge impact on the game. But they can also create a leader that works at offering, like makes your offering cards maybe cheaper, or when you play one, it triggers something.
Yeah.
That's the way they're going to have to develop offering, is like if they want the red-yellow identity to be about offering, they're going to have things that trigger off offering or make it easier to play or something.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, like in terms of, going the Invoker route or whatever. But if you look at Aegis as well, it started off with stand 2 energy, but now, because it was underwhelming, stand 2 energy, draw 2 cards. Right? I mean, they could add to it. They could have a secondary auto effect on some of these cards. But again, it's just all about balancing. It's not an offering specific thing. Fine. So the blue-green revive, right? So blue-green revive is pitch a blue and green card in brackets there, and then when this battle card is KO'd, it's then replayed from the drop with the revive skill negated for the turn. So can anybody? This was decent-ish with Surge Piccolo. Am I remembering that right?
They had a little bit of it, and then it was quickly abandoned for just good cards. Yeah.
So why is this? I mean, it seems reasonable. There's not many cards with it. I think it's like 8 cards with it as well. It does trigger Frieza's Army Healing Pod, which people are using. But it doesn't trigger the discard Beerus that comes into play, right? I think I'm right in saying that, because it's a cost instead of a skill effect.
No, it does trigger it. It does trigger it, because it's not that it's a cost, it's that it's only a battle card when the battle card is in play.
Gotcha.
Is the battle card in play when revive triggers, or is it in the bin?
Not, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't trigger Beerus, so it must be that it's played. It must be in the drop.
Yeah, so therefore it's not a battle card skill, because it's no longer a battle card when it's in the drop.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, revive's put on a couple of blockers, so in an absolute pinch, you can defend a couple of big attacks with them. But I think what we're saying about counters as well, because it's replayed, you're giving your opponent an opportunity to counterplay it as well. And none of them really have barrier or deflect or anything to stop it. So it's a bit underpowered, I would say, overall, but it's kind of I don't know if it is a fine line to walk, a card that's situationally useful to bring back from the bin versus a card that you'll always want to bring back if it dies.
Yeah, and also you've got to ditch cards, which is a cost to bring it back, right? It's not free. Same with Aegis, really. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, right? It's only really good with something like blocker, but then as soon as it's on the table, there's so much removal in the game that people start removing it, right? Okay, fine. If it's resistant to removal, then it will work. But what's the problem with revive? It only works when it's KO'd. A lot of the removal in the game isn't about KOing stuff. It's about reducing its strength to 0, which then it's removed by a skill, so it doesn't trigger it, right? That's what red does. By a skill. Blue either returns it to hand or puts it at the bottom of your deck. It's like, well, that doesn't trigger it either. Black puts it in your wall. Well, that doesn't trigger it. So that's 3 of the 5 colours aren't triggering it. Yeah. Yellow has more kind of soft control, but also I think it does have a KO effects when things are in rest mode, or it used to, and there's probably less of it now than there was. So it triggers off yellow, and then it triggers off green. All the sort of green removal is KOing stuff, I think, pretty much. Yeah. And so it's only really good against its own colours removal, which is I always find it weird when they design cards and the answers to the cards are in the same colour as the answer.
You're going to want the odd mirror match. You're going to want the odd other deck that's playable out of your colour.
Yeah, you got the mirrors, but I think just having it KO'd only and not KO'd or removed by a skill, if that would be too strong, I don't know, and maybe they play tested it and it was too strong, so they just changed it. But yeah, I think it'd be nice to have more on the blockers, and then they would make them blockers slightly more difficult to remove just by.
But I'll tell you why it's probably not removed by a skill, because green's got a lot of skills where it would remove its own battle cards.
Yeah, and then you start triggering your own
pretty decent advantage. Vince, did you ever play a revive deck?
I have centered on the Super 17 seconds the detonation, which has revive, so that's why I put the revive back in it. But I didn't put it because of revive. As I said, like, it's because of the card and the effect it has when one of your opponent's card is KO'd. I have to admit, I like revive because there's a lot of interaction in it. Like, you get a card back, so you get to trigger again all the interplay effects that the card has, which is the point of revive. A bit like when the alliance is triggered, you get a number of effects that come with it. The ones for revive are just the interplay effects. So yeah, that I find it interesting and it's fun to play, but exactly for the reasons that Matt said, most of the colors will just go around revive anyway, so it won't be easy to trigger it. So in order to trigger it, you would have to find a way to KO your own card and get a bonus from it, on top of using an effect to KO your card, discarding a card to trigger revive. You still have to make up for all of this. So yeah, it's I like it. I believe it's a bit lacking today. There are some better revive cards than others, and probably some better revive decks than others, but the cost is high and it's hard to make room for the effects that can come off of it. Yeah, I like it. I'm not enthusiastic, but I like it.
Yeah, I like it. I'm pretty hopeful for it. And talking about actually competitive play, it just sparked in my head that I think it's Eggman on YouTube has done pretty well in a tournament recently where he's playing the starter Vegito and the revive cards, because obviously when you've got a Nelt blue Saiyan, they have to attack that and they can't attack your leader, or your leader doesn't take damage. I can't remember specifically. So that, and then they work in that because then they're forced to attack your battle cards, then they get KO'd, then you can trigger revive. And so I think there is a deck there, and I think revive has probably the most potential out of the ones we've seen, because I think Invoker and Successor and Alliance are kind of getting to where they need to be good, and I think revive is nearly there but not quite.
Probably, I'll definitely have a look at that deck that you mentioned by Eggman. I like that what that guy does more and more every time I watch his videos. Isn't there a Goku? Oh no, it's just a blue Goku that gets card under it, and it's nothing to do with revive.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's good. I'll go and have a look. And yeah, you're right. There are a few Saiyan revives, namely Goku's, and maybe the Gohan and Piccolo one as well. So yeah, you force your opponent to attack them in a way where how does I'll look into this later. I'll have a look at it. If you're curious like me, make sure to check his YouTube channel and have a look as well.
Cool. So then we come on to the last multicolor keyword, at least at the moment. So this one's green-yellow Successor. Here you sack off green and yellow battle cards in your play area, so that's green or yellow or green and yellow, with costs exactly matching the card that you want to play, and you play it. And there's maybe some other costs involved, but the core part of it is you have to match the cost of the battle cards in play to the cost of the card that you're playing from hand. And I would say arguably this is the best of the multicolor skills. I mean, I don't know if anybody would agree or disagree.
I mean,
you could make a case for Invoker being better.
I think the Invoker is stronger at the moment, but I think the best skill, or the one with the most potential, is Successor, and the one that's made it into more decks. Like Invoker is Invoker, Successor will see some play in a lot of green-yellow decks. Has it really made its way into many decks, or is it just Cell Xeno that's made its way into many decks? Yes, I mean obviously that's the finisher, but some.
I think the Topo gets played.
Yeah.
6 cost 1, blank them, KO it. Super 17 got played quite a lot as a finisher.
And it maybe wasn't topping everything, but I think it was a decent enough ability and a decent enough deck. And
then the Universe 11 was probably a bit more like, in the same way Invoker is the sort of red deck we know. I think the Universe 11 one is probably like maybe the Successor version of that, because then you get a Topo. Sometimes you play Jiren, then you play the Cell. I think this one is quite interesting. It's just another way of like ramping up cards, and in a way that isn't tied to specific chains. It just is like, oh, here's a good card. There is a cost. You need to have this amount of energy out to play it already, and then you have a discount. So it allows you to, like, the designers to build a game where you have to build a little bit of a board state to then play a better card, instead of like, oh, here's a very rigid chain of like, you have to play this card, then this card, then this card, and that's your payoff. This allows them to be a bit more flexible in these colours and be like, oh, let's build this board state, then slightly later, but still ahead of curve, you get to play a big bomb.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's quite nice. I think there's, it's super flexible in the same. It's, what the successor cards do themselves is the interesting bit of this. But I think as an enabler for those cards, the mechanic, I think, is really good. I think it's really... Yeah, sorry.
I think your cat agrees. Oh, your cat
that's Chunky Boy is getting fed, so...
Happy cat.
Well, I think the good thing about Successor is that it will continue to get support in the fact that new green and yellow cards are going to be printed. Right? And anything that could be cheated out in either of those colours kind of has to be looked at, so it could potentially restrict green and yellow in that area in particular. Particularly because often when you're cheating cards out, they've got a much higher value than the cost you end up paying for them. But they're not going to stop printing green and yellow cards, so there's always going to be routes to your successor cards that will continue to evolve. And maybe at some point it might end up being too strong, but I don't think the ability itself is broken. But yeah, Cell Xeno playing 12 for free after you've swung with everybody's a little bit bonkers.
Yeah, and you're very right in saying that it probably is the best keyword. So not in terms of power level, because like this can change from a meta to another, but it's the one that's bound to be the most alive of the keywords, with, as you said, any new green or yellow cards potentially having an impact on it. For very specific successor decks, what I found to be like one of the underlying issues or costs in a way is it's actually quite a cost to discard all of your battle cards to match up to, say, even just 6, 9, or of course 12. Although when you do that for 12, it's generally the finisher. But yeah, like I like it. It's fun. It's fun to play with. It's fun to play against. I haven't seen that many Universe 11 successor decks. I know that you have one somewhere, Matt, and I'd be happy to play against it.
Well, it's not as good anymore because the way the meta's changed.
I'll play an old deck, don't worry.
But I think the other thing that I think you just sort of hint out a little bit there, Vince, is it is sometimes kind of difficult to play it out, and it kind of makes you deck building decisions. Like, it impacts them more than you might sort of think in front, because you have to sort of look at your cards and go, what am I going to play to add up to this exact number? I can't just have like a load of wonky costs. I've got to have like a 3 and a 4 to get out 7, or and that's kind of nice to influence your deck building decisions.
That's very true.
Yep. Excuse me. So yeah, I mean, Successor. I think that kind of covers the multicolor ones, but Successor's a good example of the chain keywords, right? So that's we're covered now. I guess Evolve, X-Evolve, Xeno-Evolve, Union-Absord, Union Fusion, Union Potara, and Swap as keywords. But also worth maybe bearing in mind that there's some autos that have functionally similar abilities that aren't keyworded. But these are things that have obviously come out. I don't recall seeing much of them beyond set 7. But I get let's just break them down into kind of their chunks there. So Evolve, everybody know what Evolve and X-Evolve and Xeno-Evolve, the differences?
Yep.
So I'll be very, very honest here. To me, they're basically the same, and the only difference is the cost that is always actually printed on the card.
Okay.
So I'm like,
Vince, you can't go around saying that they just look the same.
Well, it's very true. Like, they're all basically, you could have instead of EX Evolve, you could have Evolve and drop a card from your hand to do this, or Xeno-Evolve, Evolve but send the card to the world, and that's actually printed every time on the card. I don't think there's a card that has just Xeno-Evolve without the explanation of what Xeno-Evolve is.
All right, let's have a look.
Yeah.
and see how accurate you are.
I think they have enough like slight differences in them to have 3 different keywords. I mean, what's the difference between Evolve and X-Evolve? I know Xeno-Evolve, you warp the card instead of putting cards on top of it.
Right, so Evolve is a skill on a battle card in play. You play it on top. You play a card from your hand on top, and it'll keep the skill power changes position. X-Evolve's a skill on a battle card in your hand, which will also be played on top, keeping the skill power changes in position. And like you said, with Xeno-Evolve, you're going to warp a battle card in play. That card goes to the warp, and the new card comes in standing. So that's one of the. But there's only like 13 Xeno-Evolve cards. So let's have a look. If,
by standing, we mean active mode. That's some Thrones lingo creeping into the podcast.
I saw a video earlier and people were complaining about I'm not using the right terminology. The new Vegex doesn't explain what Xeno-Evolve is.
Okay.
So Xeno-Evolve, Vegex, Xeno with an energy cost of 6.
And then Union-Absorb.
You fool, Vince. You absolutely
Potara.
All right, so Union-Absorb is a cost on a battle card in play, and you'll play a card from another area. Cost on a battle card in play, and you'll have to have a card in another area. It could be in your hand, could be in your drop, could be in your deck. To play a card, it's usually from deck. Right, and again, status is hero carryover, so power changes and anything like that. Union Fusion is from hand. You'll discard specific cards with the same power level to play. Okay, so that's important. But there'll be 2 different named cards that have to have the same power level. So that's an interesting element of Union Fusion.
So you're basically using 3 cards from your hand for that.
Yes, but usually Union Fusion's the card you play is gonna let you draw cards back, right? So but again, it doesn't have to, right? That's not a built-in feature of Union Fusion, but to make them worth playing, normally you'll get cards back, and that will either be cards back from your withdraw or be from the drop or something along those lines. And Union Potara is another cost in hand, and you play over the top of cards in play, and statuses there will carry over.
The card is
power
played
levels
in active mode.
Yeah. So Union absorbs mostly Machine Mutant, so old, new stuff, and
Cell.
Androids, Cell, Boo. What's the other Machine Mutant? Baby, Baby and the old stuff as well. Union Fusion's all Saiyans, and Union Potara's Saiyans and Zamasu. The other sort of evolves a bit more broad, but tends to be kind of Saiyans. And then Swap's the last one, right? So Swap's, you pick a card up, a battle card, and play up, and you play another card from your hand. Usually cheaper. So the only thing that Swap might start there, right? Swap's just Goku lineage, right?
No, this is Frieza.
Oh yeah, I suppose, yeah.
And obviously now we've got Union's Warrior too. Yeah.
And then new set Broly. So yeah, there is Swap Frieza. I'll give you that. I forgot about that. And then that's where Successors are kind of a chain, but different again. So I think broadly, what we discussed earlier about counterplays is a problem for all of these, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And before even getting into the details of this, can I say that these group of keywords from Evolve to Swap and the equivalent autos that you mentioned, they are for me what defined the identity of DBS from a mechanics point of view. The idea of really bulking up the power level of your cards, of the cards in play, and kind of cheating cards. That's been what at least my first contact with this, and what gave me my first impression of the game. And confronted to this fairly early in my history with the game meant that I had that as an identity, and just made it easier for me to retake the game for what it is with that in mind. And yeah, I find it very interesting, and that's been something I really liked about it. I understand as it felt a bit odd in a way, because from previous experiences and other card games I've played, these are typically the type of mechanics I would have been very wary of. But coming into DBS with these already established keywords or established mechanics, it really worked well, and somehow I found it fitting for the theme as well. So I just wanted to say, for me, one of the key defining features of the game.
Yeah, you couldn't have a Dragon Ball game and not have cards that reflect ridiculous transformations, right?
Yeah. You want to power up, you want to go Super Saiyan 3.
That's what people are Dragon Ball for, The plot, there isn't really much of a plot. It's just waiting for that next transformation to get like, oh, what's the next thing? So,
15 minutes of charging up.
Yeah.
So I think I can't remember the last time any of these came out. I mean, so Swap's been revisited, and like I said, Swap was actually revisited in set 9.
Yeah, the little bit of support, right?
Yeah, well, the different it's played out a different color again. I mean, that's where we're missing that kind of support. New Broly swaps red cards, but it's not really going to help you with the Friezas, even though some of them are red.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting there. So again, like, the Goku lineage chain's there, and it's its own thing. Like, it just exists on its own.
Yeah,
it could almost have not been keyworded and just said you can play this specific card because it's the only one that the next level up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also the fact that, like, although it's a whole chain, realistically, you only play it for the swap into the Height of Mastery.
Yeah,
Goku.
And Victory Strike.
Of course, and the Victory Strike you should get your hands on. But I'd like also to say, I know it's not exactly in the keyword conversation, but the swap chain, or the swap from, what's the name of the 3-cost? Path to
Greatness.
Path to Greatness?
Yes. Yep. The swap from Path to Greatness to Height of Mastery is fairly safe in today's meta. Path to Greatness, having Barrier, is only touchable by Trunks, and Height of Mastery has Deflect and can't be touched by Frieza because it's too expensive. So, like, it's a chain that probably deserves a bit more regard today than it gets, in my opinion.
I think it's a bit expensive, but I mean, we can talk about that in
another podcast.
Yeah, after deep dives into old cards that are still relevant, maybe. But yeah, I think, well, you're saying that these haven't been used, but Union Potara was used in set 10. We got the Vegito Union Potara card, 8-drop-1. I mean, that seems like a pretty good card. It's obviously limited to the Trunks leader, who's not really taken off much. And other blue cards have kind of got better. Zamasu is that an Evolve, or is it Union Potara? That's Union Potara as well. So
yeah,
they've revisited that, and I think they've done a good job of updating it, right? Because before you could put 2 cards on the board. Next turn you could probably Union Potara on top of them. Now you can't do that. Cards just don't stick around. So I think they've done a good job with the set 10 stuff of being like, oh, you can do it from your energy, which just means it's a little bit safer to have your cards that you're Union Potaraing on. It requires a little less setup. So I think they've done a really good job here of keeping this keyword that's like it's quite old now in relative terms of like the power creep of the game. They've updated it nicely. The same with Union Fusion, right? Before, like you said, you've got to ditch 2 cards and have another card in hand to play it out. You've got to spend a bit of time setting this up, and then at the end of it, you spend 3 cards to get 1 card. Well, that 1 card is usually really powerful, but you're still at card disadvantage. And I think they've done a good job recently of like offsetting the cost, making sure you draw cards when you play it out with the Trunk stuff. It's got Union Fusion, not Trunks, Gotenks stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that's seeing loads of play, but I think the 7-drop one is seeing a little bit of play. But I think they've done a good job of making the cards that support the fusion worthwhile to have in your deck. And then they've now obviously released the Gotenk stuff with the anniversary box, the green Gotenk, rather than the yellow one. And again, they've done the similar sort of thing where there's no longer that card disadvantage cost, which was holding it back before. So I think they're doing a really good job of keeping these ones update through the life cycle of the game, and they've got to always have these in, and they can't really start changing how they work because they've kind of set that in motion. So they've got to keep.
Yeah,
definitely right there with you. Like, I do think these keywords, on top of, for me, being a defining feature of the game, are being managed pretty well. I feel like there hasn't been a set I've been playing the game where there hasn't been any kind or some version of these keywords. released or printed on some of the cards that were released. The example of Vegito and Zamasu is good. Like one gets Union Potara, the other, and the next card in the same set gets the Evolve from that Union Potara. So you have basically both there. Yeah, I like it. It's, as I said, to me, it's a different feature. I'm happy when I sit on a card. I'm always a bit mindful, like, is it gonna be balanced? Because it's about cheating cards in, but I've never been disappointed. So yeah, I'm very happy with these, and hope only to see more of them.
All right, fair enough. I was thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one more thing. Sorry, I thought you were going to move us on. What I'd kind of like to see probably more is maybe a bit more flexibility in some of these chains. Sometimes it's very much like, oh, here's the 5 cost, and here's the 8 cost, and the 8 cost has to evolve on the 5 cost, and in another set there's a 4 cost, and the 9 cost has to evolve on a 4 cost, and they can't quite make it rigid. Where I think maybe for like deck building purposes, it'd be kind of quite interesting to be able to have maybe less of a set out route.
Yeah, I think one of the only kind of changes in those chains come from promo cards, or there's very few. You know, like maybe you could have one of 2 different 3-drops or one of 2 different 4-drops, but the top end of the chain's always kind of the same, and the bottom end of the chain always starts the same. Yeah, like bringing in cards that could be swapped for a swap would be a good way of developing those. But again, what you've got to be careful of, if you swap them for something that's of a comparable current power level, you're effectively just making that the only choice, right?
Yeah. So they've kind of got to maybe do a 5-cost Vegito that when it's played does one thing, and another one that does another thing, so that like when you're building your deck, you go, do I want to do this thing with my deck, or do I want to do this thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of nice. That's when I think that's how they should develop this mechanic a bit more, is making the chains, you know, that little bit more flexible and having like parts of it do slightly different things.
All right, cool. Anything else on this one?
Yeah. And then swap, I think, you know, reintroducing that with Red Broly, that'd be quite interesting. It's nice. I
want to see how it's done. Like, I mean, it seems actually possibly the weakest of all the types, or the hardest to protect, particularly with potentially, you know, hand destruction, because you've got to have the cards in your hand. Yeah. You've got to keep the things on the board, and you've got to avoid the counterplays. So out of everything, it seems the hardest one to balance.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's probably the most flexible in sort of the way I want it. Because as soon as you put like swap 3 on, it's quite easy to print those multiple swap 3 cards, like the 3 energy ones that they swap into. And I think the Goku lineage chain kind of did that a little bit, but never did anything apart from you just end up with that 3-cost greatness, like you said, Vince, into the higher mastery. And then none of the swap stuff got played. So it's just it's difficult to balance cards, right? But
yeah. Get good, Bandai. Right. Fine, definitely moving on now. I think what we'll probably do is just wrap up the few keywords that kind of fit in here, and then we'll maybe do a session 2 on some of the other keywords, because we're still got quite a lot to talk about, as it turns out.
Oh god, yeah.
So looking into the kind of what we're talking about with the swap and the things to protect the cards on the board and things along those lines, I think we'll group in Barrier, Deflect, and Indestructible, each of which kind of keep cards on the board. So Barrier obviously meaning can't be chosen unless something gets around it. Deflect can't be counterplayed or can't be affected by counterplay skills. And Indestructible can't be KO'd or removed by a skill, right? And these are all things that we're saying can kill these chains. So I don't know, like Barrier's probably always been a part of the game out of all of them. I'm not sure when the first Deflect card came in, but Barrier was probably one of the set 2, if it wasn't even in set 1. I'll have a look just now. What do people like? Do people think Barrier's too easy to get around, is my question.
I think the problem with Barrier is, right, if it's not easy to get around, then it's really boring, as I think. Once something has Barrier on the board, it just stays there. I mean, obviously now, like, it's quite good in Dragon Ball that you can swing into things, but when they're now exhausted. But yeah, are things with Barrier easy to get around now? It's always a bit of an arms race, right? They always start printing barrier things, then they print the answer to the barrier things, and they print the barrier things cheaper so that the answers to the barrier things aren't worthwhile, and then they print the cheaper answers to the cheaper barrier things. And then at some point the game will kind of implode, which is always going to happen with power creep as a way to maintain new cards. But
yeah,
I think so far they've done a decent job of making the arms race possibly interesting enough.
Vince, you were thinking something there?
I really don't know what to think about barrier. Deflect, I get it. That's fine. There's nothing that goes around deflect. I'm quite happy with that. Barrier, like it's very easy to go down that rabbit hole that Matt just described. Yeah.
Well, I looked into what there's a barrier came about set 3 and deflect in set 4. Now barrier was kind of necessary, right? It was too easy to remove cards. It was impossible to keep things on the board for any length of time. But if unchecked, would definitely have been a problem for the game, right? Because once something was down, if you couldn't get rid of it, that was boring. And the same thing with deflect there. Not being allowed to play your cards is a negative play experience, yeah? Like, if you can't get your cards down, you're very sad. Cards with deflect make you happy because you're always going to be able to drop them.
Mm.
Although there are some things that come out with autos that are counterplayed, but whatever, let's not worry about that too much. And so it was interesting, barrier seemed to be printed in response to, or maybe they'd always planned it, but in response to people not enjoying having their cards wiped as soon as they played them. I'm not sure when the first card came out that got around barrier, but I think there's a pretty reasonable balance now where things can get rid of barrier, because what you don't want, again, is something that's unstoppable. Like completely unstoppable in the game. Like, if you've no way of interacting with your opponent's cards or board, you don't want to just have to rely on board wipes or things that don't choose anything. Having the opportunity to pay a little more or have a slightly weaker card come out, or only does a very limited set of things to get rid of barrier, fine by me. And then deflect. Yeah, maybe, do you think we'll ever see a ignoring deflect counterplay?
I mean, it doesn't need to, right? Because ignoring deflect is basically counterplay, play this card, auto, blah, blah, blah.
Well, there would be, deflect barrier when we're talking about the Invoker Vegeta.
Okay, fair.
There would be some things. But again, like you say, an arms race there. Maybe, but there's nothing a problem, I don't think. There's not so many cards with deflect that is really a massive issue. If somebody's sitting on that counterplay because they're like, okay, that's going to save me this turn. Somebody plays a deflect card and they're like, no, okay. That's fine. Like the level of surprise and the level of variance, I'm quite happy with kind of where the game is just now. I don't think they need to do much more with deflect as long as it's still in there for key pieces.
Yeah, and Steven barrier, like as it is today, if you have a problem with characters that have barrier, then just slide in some ignoring barriers, like counterplays or extra cards or whatever that will remove that guy with barrier from play. So yeah, like I guess today I'm quite alright with it on a very personal level. But yeah, like I don't have much of an opinion on it. Like I'm just curious to see where that will end.
And then the one that we've not really touched on there, Indestructible. So Indestructible didn't really come about until Series 7, and it's pretty much just Zamasu. In fact, I can't think of anything that's not Zamasu. In fact, I'll tell you what, let's have a quick look.
What
do you think
that? I guess it's
I think
another way of giving something protection that probably could be rolled out to other cards, like other big cards. Gogeta stuff, the Gogeta BR stuff has it can't be removed it can't be KO'd. So that's like similar sort of thing, but
yeah,
it's long-winded rather than just a keyword. So I don't know why they didn't keyword that, because I think that text is probably on more cards than Indestructible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think it's much more. You put it on cards that you want them to stick around.
I think it's interesting and slightly different because it can still be burned, right? So there's no red Zamasus either, and obviously burns a red power. There's yellow, green, and blue Zamasus. So it's interesting, in the color wheel there.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, there are cards. There's quite a number of cards that say cannot be KO'd, and a couple other cards that say cannot be removed by a skill. And some, I think there might possibly even be some that have both. That could have just had the keyword Indestructible.
Yeah.
If it's a Zamasu only thing, and not every Zamasu has Indestructible, but is this something that needed to be keyworded?
And I think they keyworded it just because, like, that goes with that lore, that story of the game where Zamasu is that type of character, and like it just gives character a trait of character in a way to the card in itself without having resort to any other things. I'm fine with it being like that, and like Zamasu having Indestructible while the others have a line of 6 words to explain the same thing. Like I like it. It gives a bit more flavor even to the game.
I'll correct myself. Actually, Zamasu's came out in sets 2 and 3, and they had Indestructible. And
before Barrier.
Before Barrier, yeah. So it was maybe Indestructible was too much, right? Maybe that was their first attempt at keeping things on the board. Maybe other cards would have got it, but maybe Barrier's kind of taken its place because it's easier to print cards that get around Barrier than get around Indestructible. Which is interesting. But fine, I mean, I feel like that's only about half the keywords, and we've already been on here for quite some time, so I think maybe we can split this into a 2-parter. How do we feel?
Yeah, seems like a good idea. Get episode 2 a bit later.
Rather than skipping over some of the maybe less developed keywords.
Yeah, I mean, everything we've kind of covered so far, we only really... Yeah, we've hardly done anything.
Yeah.
We've done I think we've done the meaty ones, right? I think the rest of them are probably short. I think we might end up with quite a short episode if we just do the rest of them.
Not convinced. I think there's still plenty of stuff to be spoken about.
I do think there's quite a few things to say about, for example, Heroic and Villainous, Unique, Overload 7, the new one, of course, even Warrior of Universe 7.
Spoilers, Vince, spoilers.
You've ruined it for everyone.
And it's not a spoiler, it's a teaser.
Yeah, fine. So, tune in next week for, what is it? Oh, fuck.
Super ComBros? Are you looking for the name of the podcast?
No, Super ComBros. Nobody's interested in that. It's the ending. Xeno-sama mo otamage. That's how we're ending it, right?
There's no better bro than a Super ComBro.
Terrible. Well, there goes our 2 subscribers.
Yeah.
It got a giggle from that. For me, it's a cool.
I mean, look, right. Barry hates the Super ComBros name, but deep down, I'm sure he really loves it.
I'm not convinced. Not convinced at all. Topo Talk Radio. That's what it's at. Fine. Yeah, so we'll cover the other keywords in the next episode. Hopefully you'll join us. I would say none of us are kind of pro-level players, right? I mean, that might come across in some of our chat. I certainly don't get enough games in to really focus on Dragon Ball as being, the kind of high-level play it probably deserves. So if there are any high-level players listening to us, not sure why, throw us some comments about what you think of the keywords that we've covered in this one. And certainly worth remembering, if we're on the more casual end of the spectrum, things still have to cater to casual players as well, right? So if high level play, if cards want to keep coming out, we have to consider the fun element and not just the balance element as well, I suppose. But
anyone interested in the game and anyone interested in thinking about the game or talking about the game, it's nice to have these conversations.
Yeah, throw out a comment and we'll try and cover it in a future episode. All right. Super. ComBros.